I had my first beer in Japan. I learned how to drive a car in Japan. I had my first girlfriend in Japan. Like all the first everything that's like the coming of age stuff, it all happened in Japan. We did come back to visit the United States a few times. And every time I came back, it felt foreign. It felt very weird. It was a very odd feeling to come back to a place that like is my homeland, right? And then feel uncomfortable.
What was the process for you to learn Japanese? Because like when you arrived, I imagine you didn't speak any Japanese.
I knew no Japanese when I arrived in Japan. I had never had Japanese food before. It was just from sun up until well after sundown, I'm just hanging out with people. So after probably 6 months, I think I was pretty close to being conversationally fluent. It's extremely homogenous in Japan. They have a history of making it known like, yeah, you're not Japanese. I don't know whether you want to include this in the podcast or not. I'm going to say it anyways though.
And it seems like you have a very interesting story. I'd love to get into it. The way I normally start is just asking people like where they grew up, where they were raised, which I think for you is there's probably two different answers there.
Yeah. I get that question a lot. Like, where are you from? And it's difficult because, I mean, we moved a lot in general. And even after like being an adult, I've moved all over the place. So it's hard for me to say, oh, this is where I'm from. But I predominantly grew up in the United States for the first part of my life. And then from middle school until I was almost 20 was all in Japan, in Okinawa, Japan.
Okay. So middle school, like what age are we talking?
Oh man, it would have been like 6th grade, something like that. So
you're pretty young.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, young enough to, I was old enough to like definitely identify like where I was from at the time, but young enough that it was easy to kind of assimilate and soak everything up. I think when you move to a country when you are under like, I would say like 16 years old or so, it's a lot easier to kind of just fit in better than if you move when you're older.
Yeah, I mean, like even here in North America, I'm in Canada, when I talk to people that moved here when they were like 9 or 10 years old, you basically wouldn't be able to tell them apart, like in terms of the way that they speak from any other Canadian, right? Like they, I think there is a threshold. I remember hearing about that. I mean, I'm looking at it from a linguistic point of view. I guess there's different ways you can look at it in terms of cultural integration or something like that. But from the linguistic side, there is a cutoff on when you can be like a native speaker, a quote unquote native speaker in a language. And, but yeah, I have, friends that moved here when they were 10 and they're just like any other Canadian to me, you know?
Yeah. And I think that I barely missed that cutoff. I think I was old enough to where, I mean, when I speak Japanese, everybody that's Japanese says, oh, your Japanese is so great. But that's a thing that people in Japan say all the time. There's been a handful of times, especially when I was younger, and Japanese was my main language, that people were confused. Like, wait, are you half? Because I don't know like why you sound like you're from here, you know? But especially as time's gone on, I've spoken only English as my predominant language for going on about 14 years now. I mean, I've worked for Japanese companies here and there, but it's really, really hard to keep up with the language, even if you learned it as a kid, if you don't use it. I mean, it's like riding a bike. You don't ride a bike and it's going to be hard and kind of awkward when you get back on.
Yeah. But you don't have any Japanese heritage, right? Your family is from the U.S.?
My entire family's from the United States. They moved back to the U.S. also when I was like 17, like right before I turned 18, or maybe it was right after I turned 18. I don't recall. And then I stayed in Japan and worked for a bit. And then eventually I moved back to the United States for college. I tried to get into a college in Taiwan, actually, at Taichung University. And then I tried to go to Ryudai, which is Ryukyu University. It's Okinawan University. But the tuition was pretty rough to be an international student there. So,
yeah, normally it's more expensive for international people all over the place. Hey, like in any country, if you go to a university and you're not from that country, they just like jack the price up for you. It's crazy. Mm-hmm.
And if I remember correctly, I think that I could apply for like U.S. federal like scholarships or grants for a university in Japan. I don't remember if this was the case or not. But I think that what it came down to was that my parents had made too much money for me to be awarded some of these scholarships or grants, but I didn't make enough to pay for it. I mean, it was really, I was making probably like 1,000 yen an hour, maybe, which is probably the equivalent of maybe $9 or $10 an hour. So,
yeah, it's kind of a weird system. It's like your parents can afford to go to the university, but you can't.
Yeah, exactly.
So like when you were a kid and you moved to Japan, like did that feel like a big deal? Was there like was it like kind of a shocking like experience for you culturally?
I would say for me, the weather was the biggest difference because we had come from California, Southern California, where it's like 70, maybe 80 degrees on a hot day. And we landed in Japan in the middle of the summer, and we had to walk from the plane across the tarmac to a building on the first at the first airport we were at because they had to refuel the plane or something like that. And I remember walking across the tarmac, and it was like 90% humidity, probably 90 degrees outside, and it was miserable. And I remember thinking, I don't mind being in a new place, but I don't think I can handle this kind of heat. And it was 10 times worse when we actually landed in Okinawa at Naha Airport. It's really humid. I think as far as like being uncomfortable in a new place, something about Japan, especially for people that come from North America, is that a lot of areas in Japan can kind of give off this dangerous vibe if you were to equate what that looks like in your home country, like places with alleyways and really dark corners and everything really close together. But that's just how Japan looks. You know, a bunch of cement buildings that are too close to, I mean, you could put your hands on either building or either house. They're that close sometimes. And seeing that, like all these outside air conditioning units and things, it kind of gave off the vibe that, oh, this is kind of like a bad area. But that was probably the number one thing. My mom was like clutching her purse, like worried when we were walking around places. And then eventually we realized, oh, there's just stray cats. That's the only problem here.
I mean, I guess like in the US and in Canada, we do have a pretty big divide between like densely populated cities and then like suburbia. And in the city centers, they could be seen as more like dangerous areas, like the downtown areas of most cities, let's say. And there's a lot of people in close proximity, you know, like apartment buildings and high rises and all that stuff. And we do see that as like, oh, something might happen here. But then you go to like suburbia where everyone has like a big front yard and a backyard and the white picket fence. That's like the quote unquote safe area. But I guess you're saying that Japan is probably more densely populated in general. So most areas look like our city centers. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you think about a movie from the 1990s set in New York City where somebody comes out of a dark alleyway and it's creepy and you're like, oh no, something bad's going to happen. A lot of Japan looked like that to us at first. It just kind of gave off that feeling. And we didn't live anywhere that was really heavily populated before that. So Okinawa, Japan, it's not as populated as New York City or anything like that, but it's still very densely populated. And the cities or the towns, I guess you would probably call them, they all run into each other. There's no really dividing line. So one house right here could be, I don't know, Chatang, and the next one next to it could be Yomitang. Even those places don't touch, but they could be a different town, even one street over. So. And there's also no street signs. At least when I was there was no street signs.
Wow, how do you get around that? How does the Amazon driver know where to drop off your package?
To be honest, I don't know that answer because I was gone before Amazon. But okay. In order to find where you had to go, in Okinawa at least, you would have to know the island enough to be like, oh, it's next to that one purple hotel that we had a party at last summer next to the ape statue that they've got over there, that one red building. And you're like, okay,
like landmarks.
Yeah, I mean, everybody knows the main highway. There's a north and south highway. Okinawa is a really small island. But beyond that, I mean, the neighborhood streets, my street didn't have a sign on it at all. And they would number the houses by when they were built. So sometimes our house was number 7, but the house next to us was number 13. And the house next to that was like number 9 or something like that. So when they were building this, it would just be numbered based on when it was built. So it was really hard to navigate that way. And this is before Google Maps. So we would just drive around and get lost, really.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a nightmare if you're driving and trying to navigate, like, okay, here's 7, then we need 8, and you're like, oh, that could be on the other side of town if it was a newer building or an older building. That kind of reminds me a little bit of Colombia. I lived there for a few months. That's where my fiance is from. And they almost had the opposite problem. Well, I mean, I call it a problem. It works for them. But like where the directions, like the addresses are super, super long. Like there's like 5 more numbers than we would have. And so you read this direction, it's like 1, 2, 3 street ABC and this and that. And then there's like numbers mixed with like neighborhoods as well. So like you don't just live at that house number, but you live in the neighborhood associated with it. And I found it like very confusing. And they also do things kind of old school a little bit, like lots of taxis. And so you get into a taxi and most of them are not running like Google Maps or any navigation. So then you have to explain to them where you live. So then it was always like, I live in, this particular neighborhood in that cul-de-sac off this street, and this building has a different name and it's right beside the bakery on the corner. And like, it seemed harder than it needed to be from like the Canadian perspective. I'm just like, we're used to like 123 Smith Street. And, but yeah, they have, some pretty different directions or, addresses for sure.
Yeah.
So like when you were like, when you first arrived in Japan, I mean, you were like of school age. Were you going to a local Japanese school or did you go to international school?
So I went to an English speaking school, and then I also went to a Japanese cram school called Kumon. Kumon is like, I think you might have them in Canada also. And we have them in the United States. In the US and Canada, I imagine they just do English and math for the most part. So it's for, they would laugh at me when I told them I went, because they said it was for dumb kids that didn't know how to do math or were bad at Japanese. So you'd go and you do all these packets and workbooks to learn how to do that. And then I was homeschooled for a bit because I was always in trouble and I was causing havoc, and I ended up graduating from an online school based out of the United States as like a private thing, which was actually really good for me personally. I mean, I struggled to go from, we were homeschooled for a bit in California, then we went to a regular school for a bit too, then we went to like schools that were in between that, so we'd be homeschooled for some classes, and then some days we'd be in a school, and it was really difficult for me to bounce back and forth. So I ended up being homeschooled for a good portion of my life. And it was easy because I could just knock out the tests really quick and then not have to worry about it. My biggest issue in school in general was I just didn't like being there. If I already knew what I needed to know, I didn't want to spend time in there. I wanted to go out and skate. That was the thing that I did the most growing up. That's how I learned how to speak Japanese for the most part. How I made friends and how I got around. So
like the Kumon was like a tutoring service.
Yeah,
is that what that is?
Yeah, they call it like an after school. So I would go on like Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays from like 3 p.m. until maybe 6 or 7 p.m. And it would just be nonstop going through Japanese writing system, hiragana, katakana, kanji, going through grammar stuff, doing all these packets and getting them graded and things like that. And I ended up working there as a tutor for a little while afterwards. And I would teach Americans who were there for military bases to speak Japanese and teach Japanese kids how to speak English.
Ah, cool. Like you mentioned that we have that in Canada. I have seen those signs around here in Vancouver, and I never knew what they were. It's like a blue sign with like white lettering, right?
It has the saddest happy face as their symbol.
in the O, right? In the O. Yes.
It.
It's like a super fine font. I've seen it around here and I never knew what it was. I just assumed it was like a coffee shop, to be honest. I didn't know it was like a school.
Yeah. I think the actual, I don't know the direct translation. I think I think most people just say cram school. So Japan is a very, very different country from the United States. I mean, everything is for the greater good, for the people that like for the whole betterment of society, I guess you could say. And they do school hard in Japan. I knew kids that would wake up for school, be at school by 7 a.m., get done with school at like 3 or 4, then go to Kumon from like 4 to 8 p.m. And then in between that, they've got baseball practice because they pick one thing to do, baseball, violin, some basketball or something. And they do that on the weekends. They do that when they're not in school. And it's just a constant something going on. So Kumon is one that I think most half Japanese kids, there's a lot of half Japanese kids that go there, especially when their dad's like in the military and their mom wants them to learn Japanese. And I feel like any half Japanese kids listening, when they hear the word Kumon, they're like, oh God, because it's nobody wants to go back to school when you're done with school already for the day.
Yeah, especially as a kid, that would be brutal. Just like nonstop school. I mean, with such an emphasis on education, especially at a young age, was it hard for you to kind of fit into that group because you had such like an alternative education, like a little bit of this, a little bit of that? Not
really. I was really lucky in the friend group that I was surrounded by. So Japan in general, like there's this idea of what Japan is, and for the most part, it's kind of correct, pretty strict rules and people act a certain way. My friends were not that way though. I was friends with a lot of people that would be considered something called Yankee. Yankee is like a punk subculture of Japan. So a lot of them would dye their hair different colors. They'd shave their eyebrows off. Some of them have tattoos. They ride motorcycles. They drink underage and fight and party and skateboard and do all this dumb stuff. And that's the things that I was into when I was younger. So I didn't have any trouble in that regard. I was also, when you're not Japanese, you're not Japanese. I mean, it's very, very apparent, especially if you're from a Western country. I mean, I would never be considered Japanese, even if I was born and raised there. I remember watching people that were born in Japan as foreigners still be treated like foreigners all the time. So I think at a certain point, you just kind of accept, I'm just here. Like, this isn't my country. I'm just going to enjoy my time and, make the most of it. But I didn't attempt to become Japanese. I was always very well aware that I wasn't, especially in Okinawa. Okinawan people are not, they're not the same as like mainland Japanese people. It used to be its own kingdom. They have their own language that's a Japonic language that's not Japanese. And by and large, they're shorter. So most of my friends were maybe between 5 feet and 5'6". So me being 6 feet tall by the time I was 17, it was like very noticeable that like that guy's not from here. So yeah, it was kind of cool being on the outskirts of it because I got to experience the fun things about growing up as a kid without experiencing the same sort of pressures that my friends had to go through.
Yeah, you were kind of like in a bit of a sweet spot, I guess, if you could say that. I mean, what I always find interesting in countries that are very homogenous in terms of like ethnicity is that I think that intrinsically we wouldn't notice differences between people if we were embraced culturally. Do you know what I mean? Like, I do wonder to what degree you saw yourself as different in Japan because other people saw you as different. Like without that kind of like that cultural lens that people might look at you through because, most people are just ethnically Japanese and you aren't. Without that, do you think you would have seen yourself as more Japanese? Would it have been easier for you to embrace that side of you?
I don't think so. Just the situation that I was in, Okinawa is probably the most westernized version of Japan that exists. There's a huge amount of military presence there. There's a lot of Starbucks, a lot of McDonald's and places like that, especially close to the military base. And because of that, I think, and the fact that the people of Okinawa are very different culturally speaking than the rest of Japan, can you repeat your question one more time? Because I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry about that.
To what degree did you see yourself differently because other people may have seen you differently?
Gotcha. So I think that mostly people just kind of accepted that people were there that weren't from there, and they weren't like constantly pointing it out all the time. But I mean, it was very apparent, especially when, the two religions of Japan are Shintoism and Buddhism. It's like a 50-50 split for the most part. And it's very cultural. It's much less so an actual practice that people follow very strictly. But even with that, we didn't go to temples and things like that unless it was just like during Obon for like a festival or something like that. We didn't participate in the cultural things that they did the same way. At home, we were American, like 100% of the time. So in the house, we would try to find ways to watch American TV. And we had a lot of American DVDs and things like that, We didn't really spend much time inside, but the food we ate was different. My parents didn't really get into Japanese food like that. They were just like, hey, we're here for work. We like the place. We want to stay here for a while for sure. But I think that they knew it wasn't going to be a permanent thing for us. Like we weren't going to stay there forever. But as a kid, it didn't matter if it was going to be 8 years or 20 years. For me, it felt like this is where we're living now. This is where we're going to be forever. So I think it was probably less the people and just more that my experience in Japan was a lot different because I had like 1 foot in, 1 foot out for most of it. It wasn't like I was living with a Japanese family, going to a Japanese like public school the same way everybody else did. And Okinawa is very different than the rest of Japan. So I say Japan, I say I grew up in Japan because when I say I grew up in Okinawa, a lot of people are like, I don't know what that is. But I guess I would probably explain it as Okinawa is to Japan as Hawaii is to the mainland United States.
Okay.
It is a part of the United States, but there is a different culture. There's a different language. And yeah, it was its own kingdom back in the day. So because of that, it is very much different than the rest of Japan. There's still, they still speak Japanese. They still follow Japanese law and everything like that. But there is a very distinct difference when you go to Okinawa. They're much more laid back, more outdoorsy, more loud, more people that wear shorts in public. Like I think it's much closer to Hawaii.
And like, how many years were you in Japan in total then?
Oh, let's see. We're probably looking at like 8 or so.
8 years?
Hmm.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, like 8 years is a long time when you're a kid, right? Like for your parents, they probably saw it as like, a short stint, do these 8 years and then, go back to the US. But like those are some pretty formative years for you.
Yeah, and those
So,
were my growing up years. I mean, when I think
Yeah.
about the time before I was in Japan, I have memories of it, but there was nothing like really important about what shaped me as a person in those years, if that makes sense. I lived in Indiana until I was 8 years old, and I barely remember the things that I did in Indiana. I don't remember any of the people really from when I was 8 years old. But I had my first beer in Japan. I learned how to drive a car in Japan. I had my first girlfriend in Japan. Like all the first everything that's like the coming of age stuff, it all happened in Japan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because like, I mean, my reference point is always people that I see here in Canada from other countries, right? That have, their parents are immigrants from another place and they grew up here. That's kind of my reference when I hear stories like yours. And with kids like that, like let's say like here in Vancouver, there's a really big Chinese population. So let's say there's like a Chinese kid that came here with their parents from China. They would eat Chinese food at home. Right? They would probably watch, Chinese movies or TV shows. But in their day-to-day life, they would become very Canadian, because that's the culture that they're surrounded with. Now, a lot of that probably does come from going to a Canadian school. And I know you had like, maybe more of an English school or like some homeschooling and stuff. So that might impact it a little bit. But I mean, if you're out on the streets, skateboarding with your friends, I mean, you're getting the full Japanese experience. I feel like, you would be as Japanese as anyone else.
I think with Japan specifically, maybe. I can only speak to Japan because that's the only place I've lived besides the United States. I spent a little bit of time in Taiwan, but I wasn't there long enough to say that I lived there. I think Japan specifically, I mean, it's extremely homogenous in Japan, and they have a history of making it known, like, yeah, you're not Japanese. And to kind of illustrate it, in one of my classes, there was a girl whose father was Korean. Her mother was Japanese. Everybody called her Korean. Now, me being from the United States, I could tell she looked a little bit different than some of my class. I mean, just ever so slightly. But to them, it was such a massive difference that I don't know whether you want to include this in the podcast or not. I'm going to say it anyways, though. She didn't do well on a test one time. And one of my classmates next to me bumped me on the shoulder. He said, "It's because she's Korean. They're not good at math." And it was like, oh, okay. And you'd hear that every now and then. I mean, it was much more open about what they thought about other people sometimes than you'll find in the U.S. In the U.S., it's more hush hush, and people might, especially people who have bad thoughts about other cultures, they'll kind of keep it quiet, or they'll just do a look of some kind. In Japan, it's less so. If they say anything, they'll say it out loud, and they'll be like, "Yeah, well, I don't like them."
Yeah, they're not used to diversity because they're used to just living with other ethnically Japanese people. I mean, Japan and Korea, they do have some historical beef as well, right? Does that play into it at all as well?
Oh, there's such an interesting history. I mean, it's a brutal history between Korea and Japan. And most recently, it's been Japan doing some pretty inhumane things towards the Korean population. Korean comfort women, for example, basically Korean slaves. A lot of Yakuza, the Japanese mafia, are Korean descendants as well. And yeah, there's a lot of animosity towards them with older generations. I think that younger generations, especially with the internet and like being able to communicate with people all over the world now, it's a bit different. But Japan is an island nation. I think people forget that. I mean, it was a very closed off island nation for a very long time. So not liking people from other places was really common in Japan up to World War II and a bit afterwards. But I think that it's kind of fizzling out, especially with the younger generations. I find people my age and even some people that are older than me are very, very welcoming and very kind. It's definitely becoming less strict and rigorous than it used to be. I mean, their tattoo policies in places are much more relaxed. You see more Japanese youth becoming tattooed, and it's becoming more acceptable. As before, it wasn't necessarily illegal, but I couldn't go into bathhouses because I had tattoos. I couldn't go into public pools. And if I was on a private beach or certain beaches, they would like frown upon me showing them.
And you were probably pretty aware of the difference in culture between the U.S. and Japan, because you said that at home it was a very American environment.
100%.
So like, how did you kind of come to terms with the differences in those cultures for those 8 years?
I just enjoy doing things that are different. I mean, Okinawa especially has a pretty large group of people that are from other countries. There's a lot of Filipino people in Okinawa. There was a lot of Korean people, especially going to college there, and like international students. And there's a huge military presence. And a lot of military people that I met there, or like military kids that I met there, were mixed with something else. So most of the people there, they're half Japanese, they're half German, they're half Russian, they're half Italian or whatever. So they all had a very similar experience, where at home it's different than what it is out in the rest of Japan. And I think that Okinawa people in general were so used to seeing that it was a little bit easier to do. I think if we lived in mainland Japan, I probably would have had a harder time because Japanese culture is not historically fond of changing all the time. They kind of like to they're very conservative in that way. Okinawa is not the same. I mean, it really is a completely separate version of Japan, in my opinion.
So you said that it was like, it's more like Hawaii, more like island vibes than the mainland Japan. Does that mean that they're more like Japan is kind of known for having like social rules as well, right? Like certain things that you shouldn't do. Was it more relaxed in that regard?
Yes and no. I think that when I mean that by like, oh, it's more like island vibe, kind of closer to Hawaii than the rest of Japan, would be like, you'll see people that are more liberal with how they dress and how they act in public. They're like louder. They don't speak the same way as they do in mainland Japan. They still do have business districts. They still do act the same in schools and things like that. But you'll be 10 times more likely in Okinawa to see an Okinawan person that has blonde hair, or like different colors in their hair, or piercings on their face or their ears, than you would in mainland Japan. I mean, I'm not talking about Tokyo or Osaka, Kyoto, or Kyoto is a really conservative city, but these bigger metropolitan areas where people do kind of tend to be more liberal and open with that stuff. But Okinawa overall, I think, is more just kind of open and relaxed. They talk a lot differently. It's a little bit less formal when you meet somebody. An Okinawan person, in my experience, is more likely to default to more slang Japanese quicker than somebody who's in mainland Japan. In mainland Japan, it feels like people that I meet from certain cities will speak like a respectful type of Japanese for a longer period of time before they become relaxed enough to kind of tone it down. In Okinawa, it seems like it's a lot faster. Sometimes immediately when you meet somebody, they're like, "What's up, bro? How's it going?"
Because Japanese, like the Japanese language does have kind of like honorifics, right? That denote respect when you're talking to people.
Absolutely. I mean, the verbs that you use, the way that you use them, and how you shorten words and things like that. I mean, we have similar things in English. I just think it's not classified the same. In English, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, things like that. You don't usually say that with your friends, but in Japan, they do use those kind of honorifics with people, even if they're acquaintances with them for a while. But Okinawan people, in my experience, are much faster to just drop the honorifics and hang out.
What was the process for you to learn Japanese? Because like when you arrived, I imagine you didn't speak any Japanese.
I knew no Japanese when I arrived in Japan. I had never had Japanese food before. The closest thing I had was ramen, and we used to break it up in the packets and eat it. So we had no idea that was a big no-no. The process for me learning Japanese, it was an interesting process because I started learning Japanese at a skate park. We moved into this house, and a couple blocks away from us was this big skate park. And I think the day we moved in, I took my skateboard over and started skating. And I met this Japanese kid who became a very good friend of mine, who wanted me to skateboard with him, but he didn't speak English and I didn't speak Japanese. So we're like hand gesturing at people. And eventually he called over another friend of his who spoke English, and he started translating for us. And he said, "Hey, I don't want to say the guy's name, but hey, I'm just going to say Hiro, right? Hiro doesn't want to speak English because he's Japanese. So he told me that he's going to teach you Japanese." I said, "Okay." So he would point at things like the grass. He'd say, "Kusa." I was like, "Oh, kusa, that's grass. Okay. Sora, that's the sky. Okay." And he would teach me slang, and he would just point at everything. He would not even attempt to speak to me in English. 100% Japanese. Even if he knew the word in English, he's like, I'm not saying it. You're in Japan. You can learn Japanese. And so there was a lot of that, a lot of just hanging out with people. And when I would move there in the summer, so there was no school. So for the first like 2 months that I was in Japan, it was just from sun up until well after sundown, I'm just hanging out with people. So after probably 6 months, I think I was pretty close to being conversationally fluent. And back then, we didn't use Google. We didn't have internet at the house. We didn't have a computer. I don't even think we had a computer at all. I didn't get my first one until I was like 20. So I would take a dictionary and I would write down words from the dictionary that I wanted to use. I remember I would do a list of 50 and I would use every single word on the list at least once a day. And I would keep that list for a week. Then I would make a new list and I would do that week over week over week. And then I'd go back to it and test myself all the time and try to use them in conversation as much as possible to see if I was right. I got a lot of them wrong. Dictionaries aren't always perfect. And then throughout the day or throughout the week, if I was learning new words, I'd flip the paper over and write that out too. But I used to literally keep a piece of paper in my pocket to write down words and try to remember how to say everything.
Wow, you were very studious as a kid.
I wanted to talk to everybody. You know, when
Sure.
the people I'm hanging out with are laughing, I wanted to know what they're laughing about. And when we would go over to their house to eat, I always felt awkward if they invited me to their house because I didn't know any of the customs really. I didn't know like what to say or do. And their family members were always so kind. But I always thought, man, I wonder what they think about me. Like, I'd like to at least say thank you. Or like when they explain what I'm eating, I want to know what I'm eating and not just nod and smile and eat it anyways, which is what happened a lot.
So like what came first then? The proficiency in the language or understanding, let's say, the majority of the customs?
I would say they probably came about the same to me, about the same time. My proficiency in the language, unfortunately, because I was hanging out with all these teenagers that were my age, that were like punk kids like me, it was predominantly Okinawan slang is what I learned. So Okinawan slang, and these people, they happen to speak Uchinaguchi. Uchinaguchi is a native language to the island of Okinawa. It's a Japonic language, but not Japanese. It's completely different. And they use so many words that were Uchinaguchi when they were talking that I didn't realize it wasn't Japanese. I just assumed it was Japanese. So when I started going to school and I'm in Japanese language classes and things like that, and I'm speaking, they're like, well, we understand what you're saying, but you're not speaking Japanese. And I ran into that problem moving back to the United States where I worked for a Japanese company. And when I would have to do translation or interpretation, they're always laughing because I would say certain words that they don't say in Japan because it's not a Japanese word. Or the way I would end my sentences or the way I would roll my R's and certain things, they were like, you sound funny. And to them, I guess it was almost like running into a Japanese person who was raised in Louisiana in the United States, like very thick Cajun accent. And I've lost it for the most part since then. But that was probably my biggest hurdle, is that I learned Japanese the bad way. And then I had to learn it the right way afterwards, and I didn't want to.
You started with a different language, basically, and then mixed them together.
Yeah. And the grammatical things that I learned it all wrong. I mean, not wrong, but usually when they teach Japanese, they teach honorific Japanese first, because this is how you're supposed to speak to people you don't know, people above you. I didn't learn that first. I learned how you speak to your peers and your friends and slang. And then I had to learn honorific Japanese afterwards. But in Okinawa, you get away with not using honorific that much. So I just didn't bother to learn a lot of it. And then when I worked for Japanese companies, I was like, oh man, I'm in over my head. Like, I've got to learn like these terms that I would have learned if I had actually paid attention, but I was always able to get around. So I never really thought too heavily about it.
Well, like you learn the language that you need, right? The one that you can actually use with the people around you. Like if you were hanging out with street kids, you're not going to be speaking like formal academic Japanese. Like it just, that makes sense to me that you wouldn't do that. I mean, I can kind of relate to that a little bit with how I learned Tagalog. I mean, I learned it as an adult. I was 18 when I started learning it. But I learned it, there aren't a lot of resources to learn Tagalog, right? If you want to learn Italian or German or whatever, you can find tons of videos. Tagalog, not so much. And this was 11 years ago, so even less at that point. And so I just learned from talking to people a lot. I did look up some things online and whatever, but the majority of my vocabulary and knowledge of the language came from talking to people. And I realized later that the way people talk to each other on the street is different than like the formal version that they would use like in the news, for example, or like any book in Tagalog. They use different words, and it's like it's almost like Shakespearean English to us. Like it's very separate, like almost distinct languages. And so even now, like a decade later, I'm not good at formal Tagalog at all. Like if I listen to the news, I don't understand necessarily what's going on, but I can just talk to people in the street like super easily, right? Like, well, not super easily, but I'm used to it now after, lots of time. And so I do feel like I have some gaps, I guess, where it's like, yeah, I'm super informal, but not super academic. So that makes sense to me. Like, and like, yeah, you learn in the environment that you're in, but like, how did you piece together the grammatical aspects of learning a language? Like if you're with your buddy at the skate park and he's like grass and sky and skateboard, and you're like looking up words in a dictionary. I mean, these are words in isolation, right? Mm-hmm. Like how did you piece it together where it's like, how does the adjective attach to the noun, or like how you use pronouns with verbs? Like how did that stuff come about?
So the first time I tried to say a sentence, I used the wrong word. And then I used the sentence backwards. I tried to speak it like it was English, which you can't do in Japanese because the verbs are at the end. So you wouldn't say, well, not always necessarily, but you wouldn't say, I'm going to the store to buy milk. You would say, I milk to buy, store, go, will do. So it's a complete change. And I didn't look at it from a linguistics perspective because I was a kid. I just looked at it as a puzzle. Like what sounds do I need to make in what order to say what I want to say? And so I didn't start looking at, okay, what's a conjugation? What's a pronoun? It was just tell me what to say. And then eventually my brain's going to get it. And I think it eventually worked out. Now the actual grammatical learning of that came from Kumon and other Japanese courses I was taking. I took courses at like Japanese schools around there too. So that's where the actual book grammar came through. But a huge part of it was if I used the wrong word or the wrong grammar, my friends would just correct me immediately. So if I said, nani nani ga, they would say, nani nani wa. I'm like, oh, it's not wa? Why? And they said, it just isn't. I'm like, okay, cool, got it. And then I would just remember to say it that way. And I think I started to kind of learn it like how a child does. My son, his name's Theo, and he always says, Theo wants this, because he's copying when I'm speaking to him. I'm like, hey, Dad has got to go to work, buddy. I'm sorry. So he started copying that. And I have to correct him a lot because I did it too much. And I think that's basically how I learned too. Like the particle o, W-O, I can't even, it's hard for me to explain what it does in a sentence. It's like indicating that something is going to happen to another thing. But I think I was there so young that I just understand the feeling of the part, like what it is. Yeah. So I don't have to think about like why it is. I just know that that's what it is. And in English, it's the same thing. I have no idea why we would say big brown car and now not brown big car. I just know that big brown car is the right way to say it. So I think that just kind of came from hearing people and having people correct me. And then eventually it just kind of slid in.
Yeah, like you learned it in the most natural way possible, right? And when you can see it in context, I mean, we learn as humans, we learn so much from context because our brains are just geared to see patterns, right? I had a conversation with someone the other day about, like words that are hard to, that might exist in other languages, but don't exist in English. And so if you haven't learned another language, you might think, well, how could you possibly learn a word that we don't have the words to express? Like how would you even begin to wrap your head around that? But you learn it from the context, like you did in Japan, right? You hear it enough and you hear that particle word in context and you just begin to build a mental association with what that means. And then pretty soon, even though that meaning doesn't exist in English, it exists in your brain. And you just know how it works. And that would happen as an adult as well. Yeah, it happens much easier as a kid, obviously. But even as an adult, if you just basically get enough reps of hearing something that's unusual, your brain figures it out after a while. So you said like it took like 6 months or something before you were like pretty much conversational?
Yeah, I would say 6 months is about there. I'm guesstimating. That was 20 years ago almost now. So about 6 months, or it was over 20 years ago now, for me to get to the point where I could go into a supermarket and ask for something specific. And if they didn't have it, I knew what else I could ask for. They could give me directions to where to find it. I knew how much money to pay for everything, and I didn't feel uncomfortable. 6 months maybe 9 months to the point where I could speak Japanese enough to where if I didn't understand a word, I could ask them to explain it, and I would most likely understand what they were saying when they explained it to me. I mean, they would dumb down their Japanese really bad, like really low, but I would not have to default to English or ask somebody to speak English in majority of circumstances. Now, one thing I wanted to mention is something that happened to me recently. I mean, you might get a kick out of this. So I haven't spoke Japanese in a long time as my primary language. I worked for a Japanese company in Ohio for many years. But after that, I was a photographer, and I've been doing social media and other things since then. I don't speak Japanese to my wife. She's not Japanese. I speak Japanese to my dog, and that's about it. And I'm still in touch with my friends in Japan, but we just don't keep in touch like we used to. We all got kids, married and everything. And I never learned high level business Japanese. It was just something I never had a reason to, because even working for a Japanese company, they all knew what I was about and where I was from. So most of them just defaulted to like, yeah, we'll just, if we understand what you're saying, we don't really care if it's not Kegel. It doesn't have to be perfect. I had an interview like 2 weeks ago for a Japanese company. I was trying to find something new. And in the description, they said, we need somebody that speaks Japanese. So they called me immediately after I applied, which I knew was a bad sign. And I said, yeah, I speak Japanese. I grew up in Okinawa. I started speaking Japanese. And they said, oh, I don't actually speak Japanese, but you'll speak when you come here. So I show up for the interview. And during the interview, I'm speaking Japanese the entire time with the Japanese person there. We're going over my work history, other things that I've done in like my professional career, what I'm doing now, the salary, expectations and everything. And then she says, are you able to interpret? And I told her, not really. Like, to be honest, it's not really my thing. I don't know if you've ever tried to interpret Tagalog, like live. It's very difficult to take in a language, translate it, and translate all the nuances and meanings and output it as you're hearing it at the same time. And it's something I've never really done. I've done it in minor settings, but not anything major. So she said, well, just give it a try because we need somebody. And they brought in an engineer and said, I want you to translate these sentences. And they started asking me like English that I didn't understand. Talking about like, oh, the manifold system's pressure is rated at 5 megapascal units, but the pneumatic hoses aren't, like whatever they were saying. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't do this. Yeah. I failed terribly. And then I started forgetting how to speak Japanese, like towards the end of it. I forgot how to speak English through half of it too.
It just melted your brain.
Oh yeah.
It's like,
oh yeah. And I realized like at that moment, I was like, not only am I rusty, but I also just never bothered to pick up on like high level Japanese because I had no need for it. Yeah. I didn't do anything with engineering when I was an 18-year-old. Although I know a lot of those terms now, I just never learned it in Japan. I had no reason to.
Well, and a lot of those terms, you said that like you don't even know them in English, and there'd be tons of words that I wouldn't know in English as well that are like specific to engineering or to medicine or to architecture, and like I wouldn't know that stuff. And so to have an interpreter for a specific topic, they need to be trained in that topic. Like you need to have an interpreter that is an engineer. Otherwise, it's like no one could do that. I tried to work on a translation project. It wasn't interpretation, but it was just a written translation when I was living in Colombia. And it was from Spanish into English. And I did it with my fiance who, speaks English, and, my Spanish was okay at that time. And so we had two native speakers, a Spanish native speaker and an English native speaker. And we went through this document and same thing. It was like, the hydro press and the like the pump head and the well this and the well that, and I was like, I don't know what these are. And I was Googling things in English to try to figure out what they were so that we could translate them into Spanish. And so we were also super in over our heads, and we were using the languages that we are the most comfortable in, right? And so just because you speak a language doesn't mean you like have the academic knowledge by any means.
Absolutely. And something about Japanese that's, I think, unique to Japanese is kanji. Well, kanji itself is not unique because kanji is taken from China, which uses, it's Hanzi. It's like what they use, all their characters are all kanji. But in Japan, there's not a real way to sound out a kanji like you would a letter. If I see a word in English that I don't know, I can pick it apart and I can sound it out. And if I say it out loud, I might know the word. I might not know the word, but I can kind of guess. In Japan, for the most part, if there's a kanji that you do not know and you don't recognize many pieces of it, or even if you do, you don't know how to read that word, period. And there's like, I want to say there's 4,500, 5,500 kanji that are used commonly. And then there's even more uncommon kanji. So I heard somebody say this, and I'm going to repeat it, but I don't know that it's true. I heard that the average Japanese person is not able to read a Japanese newspaper front to back without missing kanji and just having to guess what they are. Most of them can read them but not write them fully. They'll miss strokes, or you ask them to write it and they're like, oh God, I don't know how to write this anymore. But if I read it, I'll recognize it, kind of deal. I mean, we do the same thing in English with spelling certain words, I guess. But Japanese is very different in that way. Many Japanese people don't know much medical terminology. I think average English speakers know, if like cardiologist, cardiogram, like certain words that are like somewhat common medical terms. But a lot of my Japanese friends, like it goes like straight, they're like, I've never heard that word before. So when my wife was diagnosed with epilepsy, I had looked up the word for epilepsy in Japanese. And when I had said that to my friends, they were like, I've never heard that. I don't know what that is. So like, oh, she had a seizure. They're like, well, I've heard that before. I'm not sure. Like I'm not catching what's going on. But the word epilepsy in English is a fairly common word. Most people know what it means. So there's definitely a downside to that also, where if you are foreign and you don't learn the right way, you're already at a disadvantage, on top of the fact that if you don't know the kanji or if you forget it, you cannot read the word.
So does that mean that like Japanese people are just healthier if they don't know the medical terms? They just don't have any of the issues?
That could
like,
be.
It wasn't Okinawa. Wasn't that in that Netflix documentary about people that live to be 100? Wasn't that? Have you seen that one?
I haven't seen that documentary, but I had this conversation with some people online not too long ago, and supposedly it's like they called it one of the blue zones or something like that.
Yes, Blue Zone. That was the documentary. Yeah.
So I had always heard that in Okinawa, and from people that weren't from Okinawa, that was true. Apparently, though, it might not necessarily be true that in Okinawa they have a higher population of people that are over 100, because they can't guarantee that their birth year is what their birth year is, especially because a lot of these people were born before World War II, and a lot of these documents are missing. So when they're saying I'm 104, they might be 101, they might be 98. And so there's no general, like I heard that there's no general consensus that yes, this is true. But I can tell you from experience, there's a lot of old people in Okinawa, and they do stuff that people here do not do. My neighbor said she was, I think, like 101 years old, and she looked like it for sure. And she would walk miles and miles a day, like in shape, smoked a pack and a half of cigarettes a day, drank a whole bottle of sake every single night, but like in really good shape. It's definitely something to see. And Japan overall, I think is a very healthy country compared to the United States. But that's one that I kind of struggle with, because I always thought that they had more people that were over 100, but now I've come to learn that maybe that's not necessarily true. But there's a lot of old people and they're in good shape.
But like if the documents are out of date, or they're not started, they weren't written at the date that they said they were or whatever, and they are only 98, it's still pretty old. Oh, like, yeah. I mean, they're probably not off. The documents aren't off by like 20 years, are they?
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine that. I honestly haven't done a deep dive into it, but I wanted to mention it just because I figured it's on the internet. Somebody's going to say something about it. I've learned that doing social media.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But like, isn't the average age, the average life expectancy in North America, like 77 or something, like probably super low,
something like that. Yeah.
Like significantly lower than 90s.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'd met quite a few very old people in Okinawa that claimed to be, in their 90s or 100. I had no reason not to believe them. And it was just a different feeling. Like most of them had, like they were very aware of everything. They were still very sharp mentally. Physically, they were kind of frail. And there's definitely people that had degenerative diseases, especially degenerative brain diseases that would like make it hard for them to understand things. But I don't know the last time I've seen somebody that looked like that old in the United States that was still driving and going to the grocery store or doing something else. But yeah, a lot of people in Japan that are old just get around still. They still do stuff.
Something that I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned that when you were growing up, you didn't really see yourself as Japanese because you said you had 1 foot in and 1 foot out, like meaning 1 foot in Japan and 1 foot in the US. Like when you were a kid, how did you imagine the US? Like you said, you didn't really remember too much of when you were living there up until you were 8. So like what did you have in your mind that the US represented? Like did that feel like, oh, my home is over there, or did it feel like a foreign country, or how did you picture it?
It was kind of a struggle at times because like we did come back to visit the United States a few times, and every time I came back, it felt foreign. It felt very weird. It was a very odd feeling to come back to a place that like is my homeland, right? And then feel uncomfortable. I felt like the people used different slang than I did everywhere because I didn't have a slang that was like native to a specific area, you know? Like there was a lot of words that they were using. I remember I went to California when I was 17 and people were saying degaff. I had no idea what that meant. People were quoting Family Guy. People were talking about the latest South Park episode, and like all of these cultural things were moving really, really quickly, and I wasn't there for it. So I just didn't feel like I fit in all the way there. And this is before social media was a big deal. And I think social media has opened broadens people's horizons to the rest of the world. And when I would come back to visit, if we came back to Indiana, where I was born and where my family's from, I met a lot of people that just never had left the city that they were from and been there their entire life. So they'd say things like, oh, you live in Japan. That's crazy. You speak Chinese? And like just completely dead serious. Like, oh, do they carry samurai swords there? And it was just like, oh, I can't relate to you anymore because like we live two completely different lives in that way. Not that I hated them or anything. And it was so different too. Like the smells were different. The cars were huge. The cars here travel really, really fast compared to Japan. So I remember getting off the airplane, getting into my grandmother's car when she picked us up from the airport, and we're just flying down the road. Felt like we were going to die. So coming back to that was a little weird. And so I did struggle with that for a while. And like I said, my family moved back to the United States and I stayed in Japan. And I tried to swing it out there and tried to go to college and didn't want to go to college and ended up coming back to the US for college. And my plan was always to go back to Japan because I felt like that was my home, because that's where all the important stuff happened. That's where all of my friends were. That's where all my experiences were. That's where I was the most comfortable. And that's where everybody was telling me to come back to. Like, hey, after you're done with school, make sure you come back. Now that I've been back in the United States for such a long time, I still feel torn. I feel a little bit different than the people that I talk to every day. And I hate going through I think, what do they call it? Third culture kids? Is that what it's called?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Third culture kid experience is very similar in this regard. It's one that I hate when somebody says, hey, where are you from? And I don't want to go through the whole, like, I lived here and I grew up in Japan, and then I have to answer the same exact questions over and over again. Not that I want like to be mean, but it's the same exact, and then we never make it past that surface level. I always say the same exact things to the same people when I meet them for a short period of time. So I never make it beyond a self-introduction. Yeah. And I don't want to take the attention off of something else. If like I'm at a party that's for somebody else, like I'm just a regular person. I just happen to live somewhere else. So that's also very difficult. So I think it's less apparent now that I've been here longer, because now I understand the nuances of certain things people are saying, and I understand the cultural stuff that I'd missed, and I'm a part of the culture that's now evolving. But when I was missing that and I was coming back and seeing that it had changed since I had left, that was a pretty big culture shock. Probably more than moving to Japan to begin with in some ways, because I was like, well, this is where I'm supposed to be, and I don't feel like I'm supposed to be here anymore. And now I'm confused. Yeah,
like there's some expectation that you're American, so you should fit in with other Americans and live an American lifestyle. And I mean, the third culture kid, that idea, if I'm not mistaken, would be like the country where you were born, or sometimes where your parents are from, like if you were born abroad. Would be one of those cultures. Then the other culture would be the country where you grew up. And then the third culture would be the unique blend of those two together. And so I think the third aspect of the third culture kid would describe that feeling of maybe not necessarily feeling like you fit in Japan, but then also not feeling like you fit in the US completely. That in-between culture. Like, is that how it feels for you, that you don't really fully fit in either place?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feel more comfortable in Japan in many ways than I do in the United States. But yeah, I would agree with that. Especially because when we came back from Japan, I always thought my family is like the most American family. We're all super pasty. Like my parents didn't really speak Japanese, so I was constantly translating for like if something went on with the house and we had to go talk to the landlord or take the dog to the vet or go to the doctor, I was always translating, which is why I really do feel for like kids that are translating for their parents in the US and they get embarrassed. I want to pull them to the side and be like, yo, I know exactly what that feels like. I know it sucks, but it'll be okay. Because I did the same exact thing. I was always embarrassed. But I didn't realize how much culture we brought back until I invited a friend over for food one time and we were having like a Japanese meal that we had all the time in Japan and they'd never eaten it before. And I remember thinking like, what do you mean you haven't eaten this? Like we eat this all the time. And then it like kind of hit me like, oh, well, this is Japanese food. This isn't American food. Okay, so maybe we did bring some certain things back. And then I look around my parents' house and there's like certain Japanese artworks on the wall, like certain Japanese branded clothing and things like that people hadn't seen before. I'm like, oh, well, maybe we did kind of bring Japan into our actual house itself. Maybe we just spoke English inside the house and had some other things.
Like in comparison to Japanese people, you guys probably were super American, but in comparison to like, someone who never left the US, then that's maybe where you'll see the difference. Like that gradual change over time, you don't see how much you're adapting. Because I do feel like people want to adapt. I think it's like a human need almost to fit in. And when you're in an environment for a while, you just start to take on those, habits or food or whatever. It's like if you're hanging out with your friend and they use a certain word a lot and then you start using that word. Like we don't think about that, right? It just happens because we just want to fit in. It's like our evolutionary necessity or something. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's even small things like we take our shoes off before we come in the house. A lot of Americans do not do that. It's very irritating. And like I'll see people just walk on their carpet with their sneakers that they were wearing outside. And I'm like, well, dude, you brought in all that dirt into my house. That's crazy. And they'll do it in their own house.
I don't get that because in Canada, everyone takes their shoes off. It's like a Canadian thing. So like as well. And so like I didn't even like when I heard that some Americans don't do that, I was like, but what do you mean? Like it's dirty outside. You're like,
some Americans
you're gonna sit on the couch with your shoes.
Some Americans get uncomfortable if you take your shoes off because they're like, I don't want to smell your feet. So they don't want you to take your shoes off. And there have been so many times, especially in Indiana, where I go to somebody's house and I go to take off my shoes and they tell me, oh, no, you don't have to take your shoes off. And I look at them like, actually, I do. I'm sorry. I can't walk on your, it feels wrong. So I think that, being in Japan, I was like, I'm not Japanese. I'm not anywhere close. I'm just like a visitor here for a extended period of time, basically. But then coming back, like I won't stick my chopsticks directly into my food and just leave it sitting there. I'll take my shoes off before I go certain places. When I meet a Japanese person in public, often there's like a switch that's just flipped. And all of a sudden, instead of shaking hands, I'm bowing immediately. There's no confusion about anything. So I feel like, maybe it did tag along with me in some way. My wife points it out more than I do. I don't notice it half the time. But my big struggle here right now is ordering Japanese food in the United States because almost no Japanese restaurants near me are owned by Japanese people. And most people that work there are American. And I don't know how they say the Japanese foods because I only learned it in Japanese. Okonomiyaki. That's how I know that word. I don't know how Americans say it. I haven't heard Americans say it. So I will point at something and act like I don't know what the word is. I'll say, I'll have that. Oh, okonomiyaki? I'm like, yeah, there you go. That's what I want. That's what I want. Takoyaki.
However you say it, I'll take that one.
Yeah, however you say it. I don't want to sound pretentious or anything like that. So it's hard because I did not know that word outside of how a Japanese person would say it because that's how it was taught to me.
Yeah, because people get so much flack for that, right? Like there's that whole meme of like, oh, the person that says croissant, like, they should just say croissant like everyone else, and because you're trying to act pretentious. But I think for me, my own personal rule, I guess, is like if you actually speak the language, it's not pretentious. Do you know what I mean? Like if you speak French and you say croissant however you're supposed to actually say it, then it's not pretentious because you're not putting something on that isn't actually a part of you. But like if I tell people that I speak Tagalog, I don't want to say, they say Tagalog, right? They say Tagalog. I don't want to say Tagalog, and I don't want to sound pretentious by saying Tagalog. So I'll say Filipino. Like most of the time I'll revert and just say Filipino because it's another accepted way to say it. But I also don't want people to judge me and be like, oh, Tagalog. Like I'm also sensitive to that. But yeah, but my rule, and I don't know if you agree, if you speak the language, I think it's never pretentious.
Yeah, and I think that I agree with that, but my caveat is if it's a commonly used word, like croissant is a very commonly used word, and it's not something that you would not come across outside of France, that makes sense to me that somebody would say croissant instead of croissant, With Japanese words that I struggle with, I'll say ramen instead of ramen. I'll say Tokyo instead of Tokyo because it's very common words. Okonomiyaki, katsudon, like andagi, like these words I don't know because they're so uncommon in the United States that it's difficult for me to try to andagi's Okinawan, but it'd be really hard for me to come up with a way to say it on the spot. So I think in that regard, if it's an uncommon word, I'm going Japanese every time. But if it's, I could say Tokyo. I could say, or did I just say Tokyo? Tokyo. I could say Tokyo.
Tokyo.
Yeah, because in Japanese it's Tokyo.
Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
By the way, I've always said Tagalog instead of Tagalog because a lot of my friends are from the Philippines. But I felt like I was making fun of them if I tried to say Tagalog or however they say it.
It's the only difference that where people get hung up is that it's Tagalog, right? So on the second A after the G, that's where the stress is. So it's Tagalog, on that G, I guess, maybe not on the A, but on the GA. So it's Tagalog as opposed to like Tagalog. I'm not sure. It sounds like the stress is in a different spot when English speakers say it. I don't know exactly, but
I have a question for you about Tagalog, by the way. So when I would hear my friends speaking Tagalog, I would always hear them use English mixed in with it, like how we would probably associate Spanglish, Spanish and English mixed together. And I've heard that very few people can speak Tagalog without using any English, just straight Tagalog the whole entire time, like it's a struggle. So my question for you is, when you're listening to news or books, do they not put as much English in it? And is that why it's difficult because it's just straight Tagalog the whole time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That is a big part of it. Is that they call it Taglish, right? That's the Spanglish is Taglish. And so they mix English in common parlance, but on the news, they're not mixing in English words. What they'll do though, there are so many words in Tagalog that are not, that they almost don't exist. And so things like computer, mall, cell phone, keyboard, camera, those words do not exist in Tagalog. That they don't have a translation for them. And so that's where the Taglish comes in, where they'll just mix English into it. If push comes to shove and no English is being used, like on news, sometimes they'll use Spanish words to fill that gap because of their connection with Spain. Like it was a colony of Spain for 300 years. And so there's so much carryover. And so sometimes that will happen. And I speak Spanish, so that'll be a little bit easier. But once in a while, there are they call them deep Tagalog words that are academic or really old fashioned words. And they will use those, but they're so old that those words also wouldn't be able to describe modern things like technology, right? And so that's why you wouldn't, there's no word for cell phone, and so you just have to say cell phone. You just have to. You just say it with the Filipino accent, and so it
same thing in Japanese too.
Okay, isn't Japanese has 3 writing systems, and one of them is for English or loan words. Is that right?
Yeah, you have hiragana, which is phonetic writing for Japanese words. Kanji, which is the Chinese characters that are used for phonetic writing, or not phonetic writing, but in conjunction with that. And then you have katakana, which is phonetic writing for foreign words or onomatopoeia. And all the words you just said, computer, cell phone, keyboard, all those words are also English words in Japanese. It's keyboardo. Cell phone, smaho for smartphone, or table, teburu, light, raito, door, doa. There is a Japanese word for door, but it's specifically a tatami sliding door. It's not the same thing as the regular door. And there are actual Japanese words for words like motorcycle, but it's a word that nobody uses. So if you say it, some people might not recognize what you're saying. You'll just say baiku. Or it's the easiest way to say motorcycle, you know?
Like you have to know what is the more natural way to do it. So maybe that's where you ran into issues looking through a dictionary for words, because it might be correct, but people might not use it normally with each other, like on the street.
100%. And that's where Japanese is really hard to translate. I think the translating programs have come a lot farther than they used to. I'm glad that they don't work really well still, because people still have jobs doing that. But that was what translating jobs did really terribly back in the day, was they would just give the traditional Japanese word for this stuff. And you could tell immediately when somebody's using a translator, because you're like, I have no idea what word you're saying right now.
That's interesting, because it really is like that in Tagalog as well. Like if you choose the wrong word, people won't know what you're saying. Like even if it's, and then so that's why it gets hard when someone's like, oh, what's the Tagalog word for this? And then you're like, there isn't really one. And they're like, well, what do you mean? Don't you speak it? I'm like, yeah, but like they don't say that though. Like they just don't, that's not how it's expressed. And like, and you can also choose, because of the Spanish influence, sometimes there's a Spanish loan word or an English one. And then there's the traditional Tagalog word. So an example of that would be like car. Either you can take coche, which is directly from Spanish, coche, it's spelled differently, but it's pronounced the same. Or you can say sasakyan. So sasakyan is the traditional Tagalog word and coche is the Spanish loan word. Or another one would be plato, comes from Spanish, and then the Tagalog one would be pinggan. And so sometimes if you use the wrong one, people are like, what do you mean by that, you know?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Sounds very similar to the Japanese way.
And I think that that's something that trips up English speakers. It's like a positive and a negative for English speakers, because on the positive side, you have a huge amount of Japanese vocabulary just speaking English, because most Japanese borrowed words are from English. Majority of Japanese nouns that are things that have been created, especially technology that's been created since like, I don't know, the 1800s, it's an English word. But the way they pronounce it is very different. So some of it doesn't make sense. Like, I'm trying to think of a good example. A lot of English speakers will just guess a Japanese word and they'll just say an English word with a Japanese accent. And most of the time you're correct, but sometimes they elongate the sounds in certain areas. And there's another word that's the same exact word that doesn't have that sound elongated. And to be honest, some Japanese people don't use context clues when they're speaking to a foreigner. So if they say the wrong word, they're like, what? What do you mean? I don't understand. You said cookie, not cookie. It's like cookie. That's not the same word. You said cookie? Okay, got it. I understand what you're saying then. So, there's certain parts of that in Japanese which are difficult.
And I feel like as an English speaker, I would never guess that looking at Japanese and comparing it to English. I mean, they're completely different language families. They have different writing systems. They sound very different phonetically speaking. The grammar is very different. If you looked at one sentence written Japanese, one sentence written English, you would never think like, oh yeah, there's tons of loan words between these two. But yeah, I remember, I don't know, I think I was watching a TikTok or something, and it was like all of these Japanese words that actually come from English, and one of them was like biru for like beer.
I think that one
right?
comes from. I think that one comes from Dutch or something. It might not be Dutch, but yeah, it could be. Yeah, biru for beer, and then biru for building. Also,
okay.
Biru
I mean, yeah,
versus biru.
Like a short vowel versus a long
Short
one.
vowel, yeah, like an elongation. They have like a dash that makes it longer.
And when you pronounce it differently, it does make it sound Japanese. I mean, that's the point, right? Is it's becoming, Japaneseized or whatever to fit into the phonetics of Japanese. And so even hearing it as an English speaker in a sentence, I probably wouldn't recognize that they're saying like, they're talking about a motorcycle or a computer or whatever.
Yeah. Some of the sounds are a lot different, like sweater, seta. That doesn't sound like the word for like sweater, but like pantsu is underwear and not pants. Zubon is pants. Pantsu would be underwear.
That's like British English.
But I think they've kind of switched those over the years. I think depending on what age you are, you might switch those back and forth. So once you start to learn Japanese and you start to understand these sounds, I think that if you're an English speaker, it's easier to pick up on like different words. Taxi, taxi, cheese. But then chizu is map. So you have to be like cheese, not cheese. You have to elongate where you need to elongate. But to be honest, like half the time, if you just guess, if I don't know the word for it, I will say it in a Japanese accent. You're right, like 99% of the time. But you get to learn new words too. Like the word for part-time job in Japanese is arubaito or baito. And that comes from German. And it's the German word for work. So
Arbeit,
it doesn't mean part-time. work in German, from what I understand. It just means work, but in Japanese means part-time work.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, I didn't realize all of the different influences on the Japanese language from other places.
I would say German a bit, Russian, Portuguese, Spanish, English, Dutch would be the main ones. And then, then of course, Chinese and Korean. But as far as like neighboring countries or non-close by countries, that would be the most. I want to say Portuguese and English and German are probably the most. I don't know.
I mean, also considering that it's not a country that has, like we were talking about, not a lot of diversity, and also it's an island. Right. So it's an island nation. And so the fact that it has that much influence from other places is very interesting. I'm sure there's history that explains that, but.
Yeah. I mean, when the Portuguese first came to Japan and tried to convert everybody to Christianity, that's where they learned a lot of these words. I mean, they didn't have cheese in Japan the same way that the Portuguese had cheese. So they adopted a lot of these words, The word for milk in Japanese, there's a word for cow's milk, but any other kind of milk you call miruku. So you don't say, like, gyunyu is how you say cow's milk, but I wouldn't say gyunyu tea. I would say miruku tea, because it's like mixed together a little bit differently. So most of these words, I think, came because Japan either didn't have these things or they had a different version of them. So they were like, well, your version's different, so we're not going to call it the same as ours, so we're going to just adopt your term for this thing. Or it's just something that has been popularized for a long time outside of Japan and then made its way to Japan later on.
And I guess we do that in English as well. Like if there's a dish that we don't have, we just call it that. Like ramen, right? Mm-hmm. We don't have ramen, we just call it ramen, or like, different foods from chandelier. Is that French?
I'm assuming it's French. It sounds French. I think it probably comes from the French word for candle.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah. But
I'm
if
guessing.
You don't have
I don't know for sure.
If you don't have the thing, and like another culture is bringing it in, it's easier just to use that. I mean, it's the same with like, how would you say like strawberry in Tagalog? They don't have strawberries. Like the strawberries don't grow there, I don't think. I don't think they're commonly grown. And so I don't know how you'd say strawberry other than in English. But, a Filipino person could correct me. But there are words like that where it's like, if it's not common, there probably isn't going to be a word for it. Because why would there be, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, this has been really fun, Josh. I feel like we could talk forever, but I feel like we should probably call it here. Thank you for this conversation. This has been great, man.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And before we wrap up, tell people how they can find your content online.
So I do TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. It's all under my username, Oyasumi Sushi. Means good night sushi in Japanese. I have no idea why I picked that. I just wanted something different. To be honest, I think my last name is Collins, and I used to go by Josh the Collins. But I found out somebody named the Josh Collins was an OnlyFans model. So like people kept thinking I was them. I'm like, nah, it's not me. So I changed my name. So you can find me at Oyasumi Sushi. I think on Instagram it's got an extra I. To be honest though, I don't do a lot of stuff about Japan anymore. I think it was like 300 videos a month for like 4 months, or for 4 years. And a lot of them were about Japan, and I'm kind of just Japanned out as far as talking about Japan all the time. So I do a lot of motorcycle stuff. I shoot a ton of guns. I do a lot of different stuff. So I think a lot of people on TikTok are like, what's Josh going to post today? It's going to be something completely different and wild. But I do still talk about Japan a bit here and there.
Mm-hmm. It's a mixed bag of different content.
I'm a mixed bag of a person, I guess.
There you go. Yeah, everyone is. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll put links in the description as well so people can check it out and watch the videos there. Thank you so much again, man. Appreciate it.